I'd like to introduce our amazing panel, Elizabeth Schultz, and you'll be leading us through an incredible conversation around emerging tech and how we can accelerate the blue technology space. So thank you
so much. Yes, Danielle, that's a good intro. So I'm Elizabeth Schultz. I'm the technology correspondent at CNBC. We are talking about tech and the oceans this morning and a lot of other things in between. So quickly, I'll just run down and give you intro for those who don't know who we have on this panel here. Dr. Jan-Gunnar Winther, he's director of the Center for the Ocean and the Arctic, previously the director of the Norwegian Polar Institute for 12 years, so a lot of experience there. Dr. Alice Bunn is director of the UK International Space Agency, so responsible for international engagement, multilateral, bilateral frameworks, a lot of government experience there. We have Dr. Doug McCauley, professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Doug is an ecologist and conservation biologist with a specialty in understanding tools like big data, which will come up today. And Marco Lambertini, director general of WWF, one of the world's largest conservation organizations. So Marco, I'm going to start with you because we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution this week. We've seen how the fourth industrial revolution has benefited companies. We've seen how it's made organizations more efficient. Tech is becoming part of our daily lives. But unfortunately, this has come at the expense of our climate and our oceans to an extent. So how can we use this conversation to talk about how tech can be used for good as it relates to our oceans?
Yes, I think you are referring to our love and hate history with technology, right? Technology has helped us to make so much progress. But on the other hand, we've been really bad at anticipating unintended consequences of many of the technologies that we have developed over the centuries. You know, combustion engine, for example, and others. So we're at a time now where we keep saying, when we hear about the fourth industrial revolution, that's fundamental. And the new technology, digitally based, particularly cleaner, it's fundamental in advancing our quest for sustainability. But we also need a cultural revolution that accompany that technological revolution. I think it's a question of beginning to think in a much more integrated way in order to foresee consequences, externalities, and manage those externalities well. Today's development model has to tick the three boxes of economy, society, and environment at the same time. So we just launched last week a new initiative, which is technology-based. I'm not a technology person, very much, more on the science side. But we have here, I want to recognize here actually the CEO of MSC. MSC is, OpenSC is Open Supply Chains, is a company that we co-created with Digital Ventures of BCG. And the whole purpose is to radically improve the level of traceability of seafood. Traceability is one of the components of achieving sustainable seafood. It has to be part of a mix, ideally good supportive regulation, technology and monitoring systems that allow traceability to be implemented. But we came up with this application of existing technology to really increase dramatically the traceability of seafood. And we piloted this with the Australian company, the CEO is here, Austral, to test this on an initial few tons of fish, and now will be scaled up quite dramatically. The concept is very simple, and I got a little prop here to show. It's a tag, RFID tag, radio frequency identification tag. This is going to be shot in real time on the fish, on the boat. This is where the traceability journey starts. And this is going to be sending information of where, when, how the fish is fished on the internet, secure through blockchain technology. And this digital identity created on the fish on the boat is going to begin to travel digitally across the supply chain as the fish is moved from business to business until it reaches the actual manufacturing level where the fish is sliced up, packaged, and then the digital identity from the RFID tag is moving onto a more classic QR digital tracking system. And that allows you, as a consumer, with this little label on the fish pack in the supermarket, to use your mobile phone, the application, scan the QR, and see exactly what the fish has been fished, but also when, how, and many other information potentially about actually food safety as well. And I think this is going to help a lot to raise awareness, but also to give the confidence to consumers that they can actually know exactly what happened in the ocean to the fish they eat, and increasingly, of course, push the sector to be more transparent, and in that way to achieve sustainability of seafood from an environmental perspective and also a social human rights perspective as well. So it's something we're super excited about it. Any questions you guys have technically, we have here Paul Winther from BCG Digital Ventures, got Marcus Selmutz from OpenSC, and we have David Carter, the CEO of Austral, the company. So there are three just straight here on the front line. So please, if you have any questions, technically, those are the guys.
Alice, maybe you could build on that a little bit and talk about some of the government initiatives around using technology in our oceans specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe I should start by just explaining the vantage point. You know, you have this incredible vantage point from space. You know, I'm not an oceanographer, but I know the oceans are pretty big. Right? Space really gives you that advantage because you're looking down on the Earth and you have the ability to take globally consistent, calibrated, validated measurements. I don't know, some of you may have seen this really amazing film earlier in the week that David Attenborough gave us a preview. You saw these really, really dramatic images of, you know, the ice sheets melting. So, you know, we have the technology to do something about this. We have the technology to monitor this and understand this. Just last month, we had a 25-year data series of measurements of ice levels. We have globally consistent measurements of storm surges, of you know, sea level height, of wave heights. You know, really, really powerful information that we can use to help work with countries to build their coastal defences. And you go all the way really from that, you know, huge global scale right down to more in-country levels. We've got a really fascinating project at the moment with Malaysia. So they're very concerned about the mangrove coastline. It's suffering a lot at the moment because of oil pollution. The oil pollution is coming from the ships in the area, illegally dumping oil. Right, so it turns out, you can see that oil really, really clearly from space. I mean, it's just like if you have bath oil in your bath, right? The surface goes flat. That sends a very powerful signature. So from space, we're tracking the ships that are illegally dumping oil. We're also using satellite communications to enable those remote local communications so those offenders can be intercepted. And already we're seeing a massive improvement in the quality of the oceans in that area. So this is just an example.
And Doug, you've used satellite images as well.
That's right. So we're huge users of data from some of these federal systems, and they're so important for us, exactly to your point, that the oceans are huge. The problems are becoming huge, so the more you can see, the more you can do. We do a lot of reliance on microsatellites as well, so private sector satellites, this grand constellation of teeny tiny satellites that are now up orbiting the planet. I wonder,
Doug.
yeah, I think data is beautiful, so I just can't but bear to show some data. So the reason, again, as I was saying, as to why you want to get that observation, why we need this technology, as Marco was saying, is because we're in a bit of a race with those that are using technology to do more from the oceans. In many ways, every industrial revolution prior to the fourth has hurt the ocean, and the fourth industrial revolution is our chance to help the ocean. So we need to leverage the power of these technologies to see more and do more. So you have this race in the oceans. Happily, there's also this space race, which giving us, as you say, more eyes around the planet to look down and to actually not just look, but to pick up more data from objects that have sensors. So the objects that I'm very interested in this case, are fishing vessels. So they're carrying sensors to transmit their locations for safety purposes. You can pull that information up through the satellite constellation, process those billions of data points. This is a collaboration that's being led by Global Fishing Watch that we work with as research scientists. They process those billions of data points using an AI algorithm that helps you behaviorally identify exactly where fishing is happening. Here's one illustration from 2012. You can then put all the data together in these mosaics. This is a composite of all data where all fishing happened that you identified through this machine learning in 2016. What's just amazing for me in a picture like this is how much fishing there is in our oceans. This is actually not a map. We're outlining the borders of all of these continents with data. So we're basically fishing everywhere in our oceans except on dry land. And we don't just want to make maps, though. You want to do something useful, to your point. And so there are lots of really useful applications with this new fire hose of big data, of remotely sensed data. So this is one quick example. This is a protected area in the box here, set up by a country called Kiribati. And so what I'm showing you here in all the colored squares is fishing activity 6 months prior to actually establishing this protected area. So you see lots of fishing activity in this panel. Then sitting in my office in Santa Barbara with a cappuccino, I'm watching 6 months after it's been closed, and I see largely the intent of the government was fulfilled. The fishing vessels have left. However, there's one vessel that's still fishing inside. So this collaboration, Global Fishing Watch, sends notice of this incursion onto the Kiribati government. They execute a $1 million fine against that fishing vessel. And an amazing way to both protect marine resources and then in so doing bring a stream of resources into a place that can put them to work. So I can't be more enthusiastic about the power of technology for oceans that's in front of us now.
Jan-Gunnar, talk about that from a both research but also governance perspective. So we have all this data and we're seeing what this can do and we're seeing ways technology can help, but is it enough? And how do you kind of take that and make more of it?
Well, this is very impressive. And of course, it gives us a lot more data, information, tools to manage and govern the ocean. But I would like to take an example from my field, climate change research, and make a strong advocate very strongly what Marco said. We need to take an integrated approach. Because reality is very complex. There is very seldom quick fixes. And I don't want to kill a breakfast party, but I'm sure the party will become better if we actually take an integrated approach. 30 years ago, we started on the voyage of climate change research. When I did my PhD, we had some indications more of something happening. We were very careful in IPCC in 1990, and then we gradually had more and more knowledge, and we know what happened since then. It's still kind of a debate and a battle to have breakthroughs in climate change. I think that's the reality, and that will be the reality for the oceans too. We are talking about ocean space. I would also say it's an ocean universe. People are often puzzled when I say that if you take the ocean's space today and divide it in equal pieces, volume, cubes, each one of you sitting here, you have to your availability a volume of 1 by 1 kilometers and 200 meters depth. Think of that and compare it to agriculture. If each individual on this planet can make use of for energy, for transportation, for food, that kind of volume, it gives a lot of possibilities. However, we have to do it right, and we have to think cross-sectoral, cross sectors in business, but also, of course, connect to the research community, connect to the authorities and the politicians. And my last point, we have so far on our climate travel, and I hope not on this new ocean travel, we should not forget the people and the cloak room, because there has been a tendency that we have traveled along with too less attention to the people that at the end of the day actually are giving us the politics and are making us make it possible to do the politics. So I very strongly advocate for this integrated approach. It's complicated, but any other approach is less, I think, optimal.
Daniela, maybe you can talk to that people approach, because you've taken this college room idea that you had and turned it into a global organization. And we've seen one thing with the fourth industrial revolution is how quickly information travels and how a viral image can all of a sudden sway public opinion. So can you talk about how this momentum can build and get the consumers interested to think about actually making changes here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with just talking about the importance of engaging, motivating, and empowering young people. Currently, 50% of our population is under the age of 30. And so what that means is that we need to have young people not only motivated, but also empowered and given ownership of the situation. It's no longer a question about who are we pointing the finger to. Is it the government or is it the corporation? But it's more about letting them know you have the power to become an entrepreneur, to become an activist, a scientist, a researcher, whatever it is that you choose to be, but take action today. So, with that mentality of ownership comes a lot of power in the sense where you can create your own destiny. And with Sustainable Ocean Alliance, we've seen that the passion's there, the interest is there. Young people just need the roadmap and the path for them to truly become activated. And so what we've done is we built an accelerator program where we are empowering young people to come to us with their incredible ideas. Just to give you a sense of the companies that we accelerated this past year, we had an incredible company that is creating straws out of seaweed. And the mentality behind that is also interesting, right? The next generation does not want to simply optimize recycling, right? They want to get rid of the harmful materials that exist. They want to redesign our world so that we're no longer harming the planet. Another one of our companies is attaching electromechanical devices to fishing nets because fish see light differently. And they found this research paper literally in a cabinet at their old university that was created 50 years ago, but never acted upon. So we can tell young people, look at the research that's in your library's cabinet and go out there and implement it and create technologies that already exist. Then you have a paradigm shift that we desperately need to create these solutions.
Can I just build on this point of view? Because as WWF, our supporter base is people, and a lot of young people. And I meet often young people, and the question I get all the time is, what can I do? What can I do? And the data that was presented before, and this is basically a way to give people the opportunity to use the data and inform their choices, is fundamental. And the more people actually have the visibility of this information and the access to this information, and they can decide on their actions based on this information, the more I think the whole sector will move and faster. And that's what excites me about this. It's not just a technological dimension. It's actually the fact that we're bringing data to the people to help them decide. They can decide whether to buy this fish or not, because this application will make you see whether that fish is caught inside the protected area or not. That's amazing. I mean,
Jan-Gunnar.
Yeah, just following that, it's another dimension with consumers and people. It's the perception of challenges. I will give an example from Norway, where fish farming more and more now is seen by the public as an environmental challenge problem. And it's a very complicated thing when you develop a business, and there are many things that influence the environment, and sometimes emotions and simplifications are driving kind of the attention in society. And that's where research has a very important role to play, to make sure that it's a knowledge-based discussion. If we are slipping too far apart and can't have a dialogue anymore, and emotions and not rational knowledge-based arguments are the basis, then we are in trouble. So that's very important to keep an eye on.
Alice.
I think one really positive policy development that's happened over the last 10 years or so is around making the data much more accessible and opening up. So, it really wasn't very long ago where, the business model was about, companies, owning the satellite data and selling the satellite data. That's very, very old thinking now. And now you have governments and the private sector actually recognizing that the key to enabling some of these fantastic applications that we've seen talked about and demonstrated is actually to make sure that you can enable as broader research, as broader innovation as possible. At the heart of that is making the data open.
If I can, just on the human dimension side, one of the things that I think maybe deserves a place in a conversation about technology in oceans is not to forget that the highest tech sensor in the oceans is actually us. So there's some really wonderful opportunities to leverage citizen science and communities using technology to get new information back. We, for example, now have a program where we're studying an endangered fish. The thing is gigantic. It's bigger than a vending machine. It's as endangered as a rhino in California, and what we do to learn where it spawns, how many of them are, is that we've created this thing that we used to call Facebook for Fish. We're now in the rebranding process. But, what it is essentially a platform where you can upload pictures, and then there's a AI image processing algorithm that then matches the spots on the fish, which tells us where the fish move, how many of them are, those sorts of really important questions for conservation and science. But in the process of engaging people in this conservation, in this research, they learn the story of this endangered fish. They have a stake in the endangered fish. They get a notice every time somebody finds the fish again in a new place. So it's a really important way, I think, to build communities around the communities, ecological communities that we're studying and protecting in the oceans.
I think we've seen just in the past year how that community momentum and also the young community has contributed to the plastics ban. So I'm wondering if any of you can take away examples that we've learned from how that has turned sort of an idea and a concept into policy changes, and how can that be applied on a bigger scale?
I can never go at this. I mean, obviously, you've seen as a response to this outrage in society about plastic, to be schizophrenic, because society is the one that is using a lot of plastic. But still, there is a bit of a moment of tension right now. But you're seeing the reaction quite manic from governments, and by banning straws in that city or banning bags in the other city. The response hasn't been particularly structured or integrated. It's a bit more emotional. But we're beginning to see that response. What I learned yesterday from the French Minister of Environment, which is extraordinary, is that, the Gilets jaunes, the yellow jackets, protest in Paris, they came to the government 3 weeks ago with 10 asks, okay, about taxation, blah, blah, blah. One of those asks was to ban single-use plastic in France. Really? I never had thought that could have been an ask from that particular protest group. It was, to show how much that issue is felt by society. And I think we should be listening, and government should be moving into comprehensive policy.
Alice, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to your question, we had a very powerful example a number of years ago. I mean, it is a number of years ago, but we in the space sector, we still dine out on this, so bear with me. The ozone hole. So the ozone hole was, realised it was discovered, using satellite imagery, and that was very, very powerful to see that, we're using these, fluorocarbons, we're using these gases, we don't need to use them, and look at their impact on the environment. And I think it sort of speaks to the point you were making earlier, where we do have this very vivid imagery, it can be a very, very powerful tool for communicating to the public. And I think it's, we can be very proud of the fact that we did manage to reverse that particular deterioration of the planet. But we will need all of our powers of persuasion, I think, sometimes to really, really garner action.
Yeah. If I may add, when you look at the response that the video of the turtle with the straw stuck in its nose got, I think that's exactly what we need. I like to say plastic is a gateway drug to other ocean issues, right? Because now people are engaged, they're starting to listen, they're starting to ask the question, what else is happening in our ocean? And we, as Sustainable Ocean Alliance, just launched the State of Our Ocean report, and I'll have some copies around if anyone wants some. And we asked our young people, what is important to you? Because that question is never asked. We don't listen, and they're on the ground seeing and being victims of climate change, being victims of ocean pollution that is washing up in the shores of Bali and other coastal nations. So when you hear what their priorities are, it is plastic, because they see it, they feel it, and they see the impact coming into the health of human beings as well. So I think it's understanding how you can use media to raise awareness, mobilize people all over the world to then say, we want to end single-use plastics, but also to have an alternative. And that's when technology comes into play.
Yeah, just a comment. I think plastic has been a phenomenal response from the world community on reacting on an environmental problem. However, most issues are harder to communicate and get people to understand and have them in their heart. So I think developing a good language, sustainable development goals. I repeatedly use the blue economy when I meet people in Norway, and I'm asked back, what is blue economy? For me, it's obvious. It's all the businesses connected to ocean, but we need language. And more precise and understandable language on the more complicated issues that we have to deal with. Plastic is so easy. You can see it, you use it, you can understand everything, but these others are more challenging.
Whose job is it to create that language and disperse it in the media and in images and all over?
Well, it's all of us, I guess. Take one maybe simple example, but now we are on the footsteps of sub-sea mining. which some think would be potentially a huge environmental problem. That's understandable. And of course, we need the rare materials for our mobiles and everything else in society. So to have a knowledge-based discussion and understanding that we are mining for something that actually, in the 3 domains of sustainability, we need to take care of all of that. I know it's complicated, but I don't think we have a choice, actually, an option. We need to capture the whole kind of frame the whole issue at hand, and then communicate it in an understandable way that people can actually engage in.
As with any innovation and any tech, new technology, a key issue is, of course, funding. So I'll start with the government side, I suppose. If you can talk a bit about, is there a lack of funding for some of these new technologies that we're seeing to help protect oceans, to help protect the environment, and are you worried that there's not enough money behind these projects?
I think, so in the UK, we've made a pretty big commitment around funding for science and innovation. We've got a commitment to fund up to 2.4% GDP. So frankly, I think the money is there. I think the root of the difficulty is in the communication. And I think it's really incumbent upon all of us, particularly working in these science and technology fields, to be able to communicate compellingly the case for environmental funding. We do invest, and you mentioned it at the beginning, and sometimes we invest in technologies where we might regret the environmental impacts. So it's really incumbent upon those of us in the sector to make that compelling case, because I think the funding is there.
It needs more funding.
I agree. I mean, I guess I sit in the lab where I look out, fortunate to look out at the ocean from my lab window, and I just see the problems that are facing us every single day in front of me. And I see them accelerate, and I see tools that are being developed in the private sector that are out of reach for, I'm at work at a public university, out of reach for us. And so I do think there is a lot of necessity and a lot of need to sort of double down, both on federal commitments, and maybe I'm speaking more to my own country's need to double down on commitments to science. Perhaps I should immigrate to the UK. But I think beyond relying on the federal government, I think there's a really great resource, both in terms of finance, in terms of philanthropic support from the private sector. Of course, I run the Benioff Ocean Initiative at UC Santa Barbara, which is an amazing opportunity that only could be created because of the generosity of a philanthropist, a sort of leader in oceans and technology, who said, I want you to put together these coalitions of research and researchers to problem solve. So that gives us some opportunity to make change. But in addition to actually have resources to put people to work, have tools and platforms to put ideas to work is really important. Here at Davos, we're sitting in a technology company here at Salesforce, right? There are technology companies up and down the promenade here. As important in some ways as resources from these companies is intellect, tools, IT from these companies to be put to work to help the environment, particularly the oceans. As I say, as these challenges get grander, we need to put technology to do greater things than put bunny ears on our pictures. We need to help them look after endangered whales, endangered fish, overfished fish stocks in a rapidly warming ocean.
And maybe just before we open it up for questions, how do you build on the momentum that you see here at Davos with the public-private partnerships, particularly to continue investments in tech that will help protect the climate and the oceans? Whoever.
Yeah, I think I would like to stress maybe the dimension of non-governmental organizations and private sector, like the collaboration we have with BCG, the Digital Ventures, on this Open Sea initiative. This is a new area for us. We are used to philanthropy or grants from governments. Actually, that kind of financing hasn't proven to be long-term as we would have liked. And I think more sustainable business operations, business-like type of ventures, like the one I just mentioned earlier, I think for us are a really new way to sustain operations for the oceans and for other conservation issues.
If I may add, as far as being an ocean entrepreneur is not easy. I'm sure all of you have heard a typical saying of when you're an entrepreneur, you have to build a plane while you're flying it. When you're an ocean entrepreneur, you have to build an aircraft market while you're building the plane and flying it, right? Because right now, we are educating venture capitalists and scale capitalists to what the blue economy is. and they have no understanding of how ocean technology companies can help these bigger problems, but also be profitable. So, as far as the Davos conversation, it's been all around educating VC firms, banks, anyone who has that private funding to really help these ocean entrepreneurs take their ideas to the next level and scale as fast as possible.
Very briefly, yeah. In my conversation with ocean businesses at home in Norway, we have got a common understanding that if the different businesses representing tourism and shipping and so on and so forth are finding a common ground where they agree that this is something we all would like to kind of push in a direction and work together to avoid what is an increasing conflict because of competition of areas. Of course, there will be different things that they can't agree upon, but if businesses and across businesses manage to come together and agree on certain common ground, I think that will also spark off a positive kind of, let's say, understanding that wealthy oceans are healthy oceans and the integrated approach.
Mm. Yeah, just a further thought, actually, speaking to the point about, we look at governments as the funder, quite rightly, but often the governments are the beneficiaries as well. So we have a number of programs working with governments, particularly in the Pacific region, where there is an absolute lack of some of that basic information around sea level height, around storm surges, really lacking the tools to enable adequate coastal defences. So I think, it speaks to your point about understanding the markets and understanding the beneficiaries, really. It's actually, if you can be compelling enough with your environmental arguments, with your research to demonstrate the benefits of investing in this research, because then you are ultimately delivering far greater benefits through putting in place adequate defences in coastal regions, then that is also a very compelling argument for that continued investment in the research.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Quiet audience this morning. Must be someone. Yes.
David Carter, CEO of Austral Fisheries. I think one of the things as somebody with a day job that is involved in running fishing boats and understanding science, dealing with policy, putting fuel in boats, finding crews, catching fish, selling fish, paying shareholders a dividend. One of the bright spots for me is the opportunity that business, and I think we've got to be really careful with the language. There's existing business, many of whom are doing some fine work. Right. I cite, for example, the work coming out of the Stockholm Resilience Centre with Rockström and a few others there through an initiative called the Keystone Dialogues, simplified further into CBOS. But simply grabbing 10 of the world's biggest seafood companies, putting the CEOs in the office, explaining what's going on with the oceans, recognising that these are smart people that are running these billion-dollar businesses, and they know that 10, 20, 30 years down the track, this asset base that supports them is under serious threat. And it's a delightful model because they get the right hook from Johan Rockström with this is where we're heading, and then they get the touchy-feely stuff from Crown Princess Victoria, from Sweden, and they see the leadership opportunities, sort of almost a Paul Polman moment about we can actually benefit from being on the front foot here. And so one of their early collaborations, and these are companies as diverse as Thai Union out of Thailand, a couple of Japanese companies, Norwegian companies, huge sort of different cultural backgrounds, but coming together first up in providing supply chain transparency and traceability into OpenSC.
Any other questions?
Great. So Catherine Cunningham, I'm writing for Thrive Global. I'm also interviewing for Eurovision. And I am so thrilled by this panel and yet also quite fearful of the extraordinary extent of damage we've caused. Those visualizations that you showed were just really compelling. And at the same time, there's this new generation of entrepreneurial leadership, which is stepping up and, like you said, looking to redesign the way we think about not just moving toward a sustainable paradigm, but actually regenerating systems. And that really gives me great hope. And so my question would be, how can we, as we're doing the research in science, really very tightly connect an entrepreneurial sort of research to figure out how, to really finance both ventures at the same time, research ventures at the same time in parallel, and have those groups working together and have environmentalists working with technologists. I mean, it really is going to require, this kind of collaboration that you mentioned, Margot, earlier. Because in Silicon Valley, the entrepreneurs that then make their first success, they then fund the next entrepreneurs coming. And so it really could create this this recycling of funds and resource into turning the waste in the ocean or damage to the ocean into a great reserve. And what was again the depth of opportunity that you suggested earlier? 200
meters and 1 by 1 kilometers in area. Each one of us has to our access.
So this is an exponential opportunity in 3D, and maybe you could just speak to that as a ongoing funding sort of mechanism or model.
We have just a few minutes, so I'll have to say ask to keep it tight.
Yeah. Very briefly, I would say, first, a great question. In some ways, I think the private sector, business and media can put on the science side our feet to the fire to say, don't just study these problems, fix them and apply your research to fix them. I think that's something we want to do. In the Benioff Ocean Initiative, part of our mantra is we have to, as scientists, quit writing the obituary for the oceans by studying these problems to death, and we need to turn around that same intellect and those same tools to try to fix them. So I think we're all in this together, but keep pressure on the science community so that we don't just study, we also help.
And also
very briefly, don't work in silos, mix people from different areas. In doing that, it will come up a lot of energy and also solutions. So we haven't been good enough to bringing together a mixed experts from different disciplines.
Last word, Alice.
Again, very briefly, very simplistically, to get success, you need the investment in R&D, and then you need something to take the accelerator and make it into a commercial business, and then you need a market at the end. I think government has a role to play in the beginning and the end. And in the end in particular, it's around incentivizing the type of commercial developments we want. It's around, taxation regimes sometimes. It's creating the markets and creating environmental markets. So we do get the right kind of investment, and we do get that early R&D and environmental research translated into something that is overall sustainable.
Thank you so much to everyone here and to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you.